I'm gonna go ahead and share part of my screen then. Okay, everybody. So I'm Dr. Michael Chaness. You're going to hear my son Avery. He's watching Daniel Tiger in the other room, but I told him he could be part of this presentation, so he's gonna be here. Uh, as the Zoom standard goes, we invite you to turn your cameras on, but it doesn't matter. But please also feel free to participate in the chat. I got to pop out the chat right now. My chat's popped out. I can see it. I'm sure Dr. Duran can see it, and we'll both be monitoring. Hey Matthew, how's it going? And we'll both be monitoring the chat as we're talking. I teach in anthropology and Native American studies. Dr. Duran teaches. No worries, Frank. Or you can turn it on and we can do that weird thing of watching people eat. Like, you're good,
You
Frank.
share with the class.
uh, Dr. Duran teaches in criminal justice. And just before we get going and start talking about borders and bridges and boundaries, as is today's topic, I just wanted to say a bit about Dr. Duran. Not only is she the faculty resident mentor for first generation students, she's an advisor in the criminal justice program, works with Joey Teese in EOP, teaching EOP sections of the GST course. She teaches general ed in the criminal justice department and broader. But those are just things that I had to write down on this note card, so like I could actually, have her where she lives at the university correct. What she is to me is a great deal more. As someone who has thought through all the left and right hand turns of teaching, and I know that might seem strange to say of someone who was a visiting assistant professor and is now an assistant professor, but like every time I think I'm 5 steps ahead or 6 steps ahead, Dr. Duran is 7 steps ahead or 8 steps ahead of the turns, the circles, knowing how to engage, knowing how to talk about teaching, not just pedagogically, but engage and interact with students themselves. I'm very proud of the fact that some of my classes are the cost to students is like $15, and I max out at about $50. And when I told Dr. Duran this, she said, "That's really good. Like, that's a really good standard to set." None of my classes cost anything to my students. And I was extremely impressed by that. I have not even tried to replicate it. I still find it too difficult to have a zero cost model to students, but it's something to strive for. If I could say one more thing, is before I met Dr. Duran, I actually knew who she was because she taught in an office, or she taught in a classroom that was like three classrooms away from my office on Mahar, and I could hear her clearly 3 classrooms away in my office teaching her criminal justice courses. And like students tell me that I'm loud, but if I'm a 7 out of 10, Dr. Duran is an 11 out of 10 on the scale of loudness in the classroom, both in the small classrooms and in the large lecture halls in Mahar. So like I already had like, you know, I had like an I didn't know who this person was that was so clearly louder than I was. Their voice was booming down the halls in Mahar. And once I got to know who Dr. Duran was, I can say this without pause, is that the person backs up the voice or the voice backs up the person. I'm not exactly sure which way of putting it, but I admire her as a scholar, and I'm extremely privileged to have her as a colleague. So thank you, Celinet, for agreeing to 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 co-instruct this Celt session with me.
Thank you, Dr. Hannes. And I would just like to point out that I do not make nearly enough money to bribe him with anything to make him say these things about me. So I'm extremely grateful. And one of the running jokes that me and Dr. Hannes tell students all the time is that we knew each other's voices before we knew who each other was. Because, that's actually one of the ways that I like to create a border and a boundary with my students. Taking the lead here in terms of what that means. And it's important for me to be able to establish from the very beginning what type of dynamic and what kind of environment the classroom is going to be in.
So let me just ask you then, like, so you can take it however you want to take it, or you can respond to something I already said, or you can I trust you implicitly. When you're dealing with students and when you're engaged with students, how do you assess and reassess boundaries with students?
So this is a very fluid thing. Establishing boundaries, creating that relationship, it's going to be dynamic. It's never, ever going to be static. And it's going to change not just from classroom to classroom, it's also going to change. It's essentially within that aspect of reading the room. So even if I enter a classroom where, for example, just this past spring semester, I taught a 300 level section of one of our elective requirements, the race and criminal justice class. And out of 24 students, only two students in that classroom had never taken a class with me. So, but they knew me from other areas throughout campus. So it wasn't like I was walking into a classroom and I didn't know anyone. All of the students were repeats. So in there, because they already knew me in other capacities and they had taken some time or they have spent time with me, I knew that the environment was going to be vastly different from if this was a 101 where we have a lot of first year students, a lot of transfer students who don't know who I am. It's almost like, the jig is up. Yes, I am guilty of calling them repeat offenders. My first thing when I walk into the room and I see so many repeat students is, wow, you guys must really not like your eardrums to continue to go down this path with me. But that also means that because I've established, and I'm very forthcoming with them in terms of who I am according to the class that we are teaching. So, in an intro course where I know we're going to have a lot of first year students, I also have a lot of the first gen students that come in, a lot of EOP students who have had some interaction with me in the past and want to take a course with me. I'm very honest with them in that I tell students do not expect 101 treatment in a 300 level course. Do not expect the same level of, I don't want to say support, but it's almost, it's a little bit more rigid and structured in my 101 because in that respect, I don't know what their limits are. I don't know what their skill set is yet. And usually that class is now much larger. It's either a section between 50 to 100 students. So the boundary that you have to set is almost of one of willful intimidation, where you need students to understand, yes, it's one of me, it's one versus 100 in here, but like, don't get it twisted. I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing in a way that is relatively effective, but I'm also going to work to meet students where they are. And a lot of this usually means that I am, for better or for worse, engaging in or interacting with where are they getting their news from? It's horrendous. Um, what are the types of what are the sources of information that you find credible? What are the types of aspects that you're looking for, or what are you looking to get out of this class? And for students that haven't met me yet, one of the most effective ways that I'm able to set that up is, and I mentioned this before, I think it was in the workshop that we did last year, Michael, where I talked about this game that I play in my classes called Plead the Fifth. And I allow students to ask me whatever they want, obviously within, and this is where we talk about that boundary of you can ask me whatever you want, but keep in mind that we still need to keep the structure of professor student alive. I will be as honest and transparent as I possibly can be. But if I find that a question is woefully inappropriate for the environment, I will not answer it. And then we'll have a discussion on what are the types of questions that you can ask your professors. What are the types of questions that you should refrain from asking your professors, but also understanding that when it comes to establishing boundaries, it's not just about creating that boundary of professor student, but also giving students an opportunity to understand that as faculty, we are people too. And we have our own personal lives, we have our own families, we have our own individual issues, and we are human. We're not robots, we're not AI. I'm not Grok. Um, Although I am kind of enjoying how petty the Grok AI bot is uh, on the social sphere. But when it comes to establishing that boundary, I have found that students appreciate when you're transparent with them and you tell them, like, I am honest. I'll come into a classroom and I'll say, guys, I'm at a 4 today. That's all you guys are getting is I'm at a 4, and there are certain things that are going on out in the outside world, in the external world, in the social world, and the political world that are going to impact the way that I show up in this work. And in taking the race and criminal justice class, for example, um, actually, yes, Frank, this is something that I struggled with a lot in very early on in my career. So when I first started teaching, I taught my first class when I was about 22 years old. So there's no age separation there. And then I worked at John Jay College and BMCC, which have a lot of non-traditional students. And in the first couple of years that I was teaching, I usually was the youngest person in the room. I either taught very early in the morning at 8 o'clock, at 8 a.m., or I taught the last section at night. So it meant that I had a lot of parents in my classes. I had a lot of students that were working full-time jobs. But then that meant that because they were in the professional space, they already came from a background of establishing professional and personal boundaries that I still was learning how to navigate. So in that respect, I was very spoiled early on in my career because I worked with so many non-traditional students, and I was able to then create my teaching persona based off of them. And it wasn't until I started teaching at William Patterson in 2018, 2019, where I had my first group of purely traditional students, and it was such a vast difference. But even then I found that, one, as my gender identity, I identify as a woman. I am relatively young. One of the good things about my family genes is that I will never look my age, which is both a good and a bad thing. And a lot of that just has to do with, I'm very quick to tell them I'm cool, but we're not homies. I I am friendly, but I'm not your friend. And I actually have a slide like that in my 101 classes where I give them a very clear aspect of this is who I am versus this is who I am not. I can, and as a criminal justice professor, and I think Matt can also speak to some of this, is students love to ask us legal advice. So your discipline will also inconsequentially have you creating a boundary that you didn't know you needed to create. Like I didn't realize how important it was for me to put boilerplate language into my syllabi that says, yes, I study criminal justice. However, I am not a lawyer. I have not passed the bar in this state. I cannot offer you legal advice. I can look at it at the parameters, at the characteristics of a certain hypothetical situation and give it some sort of criminal justice evaluation, but I cannot provide legal advice. I cannot be the one to walk you through. And, and I say this now as someone who I've lost count of how many times I've shown up to the precinct and have picked students up after they have posted bail or, when they need help going through something simple as reading reading through their lease, because something that I have found is that students are very quick to sign legally, contractually binding agreements and not having read a single word. Um, and like the whole discipline aspect of it, I never had to think about until I got here because my previous institution was John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where it didn't matter what subject you were teaching in, it had some sort of justice related aspect. Um, and their personal questions don't actually get too wild because I think I've done a pretty decent job of letting them know, yes, you can trust me, but I'm also not someone that you want to play around with. Because I do understand institutional policy and I understand it very well, but I do that as a way to help protect them. So don't put yourself in a position where now you're going to take that protection completely and wholly out of the water. But the age thing, I know, especially for our female identifying faculty, is always going to be an issue because when you're a woman in academia and you're younger, they're less likely to take you seriously because of just how young you are. Whereas when you're a woman in academia and you're older, they're going to look at you in a more mothering perspective. So it's almost as if your identity as a researcher, as a scholar, as a faculty member, you're constantly having to fight to bring that identity to the forefront. And it's a very careful balance that you have to walk because it's almost like a very finite, minute difference between being perceived as authoritative and commanding in your field versus coming across as sort of a dictator, if that makes any sense. When I'm older, you are not old enough to be their grandparent, Frank.
I will just say my two sons now are older than most of my students, so it's a little disturbing.
As someone whose niece is about to give birth to her second child, I totally get it. Um, but then, and this also leads to that whole idea of at what point do we then have to assess or reassess boundaries with students? And I'd say that definitely as faculty, we tend to have this built-in aspect of when we can identify, okay, this student needs a little bit more, needs a more rigid boundary, whereas this student now can understand a difference in that relationship and cultivating a more mature, almost collegial mentorship aspect than you would with a student that's just freshly coming into college and doesn't understand those things. I've had, yeah, we get older and they stay the same age. Yep. Yeah. Um, and then, so I've had, and I guess this would be a good opportunity to provide some anecdotal evidence in terms of I've had students where from the onset, I know, okay, this is a student where I was a little bit lax in the beginning and then I had to tighten it up. So for example, I am not afraid to give students my personal contact, especially if we're talking about students who don't have any sort of support system, who haven't had the types of systems in the home that can adequately prepare them for college. This is also why I take such a vested interest in working with the first gen students, because as a first gen student myself, I know what it's like to have to navigate institutions of higher education completely blind. My dad has the equivalent of a fourth grade education. My mother never made it into college. So even when it came to filing a FAFSA, I did not know how to do that. I did not know how to write a college level essay entrance. And I also felt that as a first gen student, that the things that were going to set me apart are exploitive, meaning that they want us to overemphasize and highlight all the struggle that we had to go through to make it here. And I've never been fully comfortable with that. So I like to get students to think more about what qualifies them to have them in these higher educational spaces. And something that I've noticed is that there's some students that require a little bit of polish, and then there are just some students that are very extremely unique, extremely bright, extremely intelligent, but just haven't had any sort of conversations on emotional maturity and emotional intelligence and how you can marinate or bridge these two aspects of intellectual capacity as well as emotional capacity. So I've had instances where I've had to tell students, there have been, now you've had two instances of you're abusing the privilege of having so much contact to me. I will block you. And I've said that to particular students because they don't understand what would be appropriate for you to reach out to me personally and what is considered to be appropriate for you that you could have sent this in an email. Like, for example, a student sent me a text message saying that they had an emergency. This was after 11 p.m. It was not an emergency by any concept of the word. It was not an emergency. So that was something that I had to sit down and discuss with the student. You can't be on my line after 11 p.m. and telling me that you need help and you have an emergency, because in my mind I'm thinking medical, I'm thinking legal, I'm thinking, all forms of extreme aspects. So by you abusing that privilege and taking advantage of that connection, you're actually making it where I'm less likely to continue that aspect with other students. I actually talked to the student and asked them if it would be okay for me to share the story. They wanted a ticket to one of the student dinners. I wanted to know if at 11:30 p.m. the night before the event, I could get them a ticket, and that was their emergency. I go, do you understand why this is not something that you should be reaching out to me this late in the day or in the evening? Um, and I think, one thing that students really appreciate about me is that I'm not afraid to be honest, to the point where I will tell them where to go and how to get there, within the professional confines. And I've told them that they need to understand that just because you think you know about someone's personal life outside of work does not mean that you know everything about them. So, for instance, something that I've been told by both colleagues at this institution and other institution is how much free time I must have at my disposal because I don't have a family that is waiting for me at the end of the day. And I go, respectfully, I do have a family. They just don't live with me. My family doesn't live with me, and my responsibilities to my family are going to be vastly different from other folks who did not grow up like me. So I have a very aging father. Whenever he's sick, I will drop whatever I'm doing and I will go to tend to that need. And I shouldn't have to explain why I am doing that. But I do find that that is a boundary that I need to establish, not just with students, but with other faculty as well, in terms of you have your family responsibilities, I have my family responsibilities. Just because they don't look exactly the same does not mean that they are not important or valuable to me. And I think that's something that students really do appreciate is when you're honest with them from the outset and you don't try to, give them a smoke and mirrors. I'm very clear with where my priorities are in terms of what needs to get done. And if I can't get something done, I'm also going to tell them I can't get this done now, but I can get this done for you within, let's say, the next week or so. I don't know if that answers anything that you asked, Michael.
So you always answer.
And then I guess, um, when it comes to this idea, and Michael does a very excellent job of creating space where space has not been there before. But then that also means having to navigate borders either formally or informally that can create barriers for how we can develop these relationships with our students. So, Michael, if you could talk more about, moments that were instrumental in how you can create a professional boundary while still forming a professional border while still having that personal relationship with students that they value and care for.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, and this is exactly what I meant about Dr. Duran, in that she has this fully articulated and well-formed opinion, but it's completely different than mine. I don't give students my cell phone until after like graduation is like the time when like this is like, okay, this is the form of communication that we can now open up. It no longer has to be captured in officially sanctioned student SUNY accessible email form. So I really appreciate your opinion and your perspective, but I've never had to block a student because only the 1% of the 1% even have access to my personal information after they've already graduated. Uh, I think that my understanding of borders, maybe we should have even just mentioned gender in the topic of this conversation, because so much of what our response, so much of what we're going to be responding to is gendered and is a reaction to the space that we take up as scholars and as people. So my understanding of borders really comes from my field work first and foremost. For the last 20 years, I've been engaged in field work on the Onondaga Nation, and I wish I had a picture to show you of this. I do have a picture, but it was after the this spray paint had been covered up by another layer of paint, so you can still see the graffiti underneath, but it's not good for sharing in a Zoom format. And it was just a graffitied building along Route 11A. When you turn off from Route 11, for those of you who are familiar with the Syracuse area, when you turn off Route 11 onto Route 11A onto the Onondaga Nation, and it was just a building that was spray painted, Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. And you might think to yourself, ooh, that sounds kind of spooky, like especially if you're unfamiliar with Ongwe people. And so first I want to say is I never felt uncomfortable or unsafe at Onondaga, and I had some real long nights there and early mornings there. Like, and my wife was always worried about me, but that didn't have to do with my safety. Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. What are you doing here? This is what it said to me. Why are you here? What do you want? How much are you going to take?
Mhm.
How are you going to ensure that whatever it is you're going to take, that you give back
Mhm.
more than you take? Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. To me, it was a constant reminder of where I was going and what I was trying to do. Even if you're not so familiar with the historical relationships between academics and Haudenosaunee people, they are wrought with abuse. They are wrought with conquest. They are wrought with colonization and missionization. The field of anthropology goes back to Lewis Henry Morgan and a Seneca man, Eli Parker, in the 1850s, first having conversations. Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. Are you going to be part of this colonial legacy between academic interlocutors and contemporary indigenous people? Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. Are you going to be of value to these kids' lives? Or are you going to be a taker? Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. What are you doing here? What do you want? And so it was this a moment that I used to constantly reflect on how I was going to orientate my professional career around giving back more than I took, how to ensure that I gave back more than I took. Because borders for Haudenosaunee people, and this is something Audra Simpson writes about, one of the preeminent anthropologists at Columbia University. She's a Mohawk woman. Borders for Ongwe people are the site of the activation and articulation of sovereignty. And if you know anything about Haudenosaunee people, that's a confederation of nations. The Mohawk, the people of the Flint, the Oneida, the people of the Standing Stone, the Onondaga, the people of the hills, the Cayuga, people of the bog or people of the swamp, and then the Seneca, the people of the hill, singular, the Tuscarora, the people of the hemp or the shirt wearing people came up to join the Confederacy in the early part of the 18th century after relationships with the British went sour. Their ancestral homeland is what is today the North Carolina. So they weren't part of the Confederacy. They've been part of the Confederacy for 300 years, but they're still jokingly referred to as like the Johnny Come Latelys because the forming of the Confederacy, at least according to Haudenosaunee people, goes back about 900 or 1,000 years when these 5 warring nations came together in order to cultivate the good mind. Has to do with the prophecies of the peacemaker, but we're getting off topic now. What I'm trying to illustrate is that Haudenosaunee people, that means people of the longhouse. The term Iroquois, that means people of the snake people or the snake in the grass people. It's either an Ojibwe or an Algonquin or a French word or an English word. I don't know the origins of it, but it's not a word that comes from within. Haudenosaunee people call themselves Haudenosaunee, not Iroquois. Or I should say Iroquois people call themselves Haudenosaunee, people of the longhouse. And they are, and I say this with all the love in the world for my Haudenosaunee brothers and sisters, stubbornly, prickly, sovereign. Like they are the only indigenous people today who issue and travel, indigenous people in North America who issue and travel on their own passports. And the most hardcore among them will only travel internationally on their own passports. Again, the only nation that does this is the Haudenosaunee, and the only passport office in the Confederacy is at the Onondaga Nation, this small nation, Native American nation, about 5 miles south of Syracuse, New York, where I've been doing field work for all these years. This is just one small example of the prickliness around which Haudenosaunee people view borders, boundaries, and articulate and use them as a chance to articulate and activate their sovereignty, political autonomy, religious autonomy, economic autonomy. I would even say educational autonomy is tied into this concept, this contemporary idea of sovereignty for Native American peoples. Again, you don't have to have a thorough understanding of U.S. history to begin to understand how surveillance, regulation, scrutiny have been used and abused when they have been applied to Native American people. Even this saying, off the reservation. You ever think about what that means? It implies that someone is deviating from the norm, going a direction that they shouldn't be going. Well, how do you know when someone is off the reservation? Surveillance, regulation, scrutiny, the police state. So, again, Native people take this concept of borders, especially when it comes to their own land, very seriously. So, from my initial days of doing field work, understanding, processing, learning about, and respecting borders, those imposed and formally recognized limitations have been necessary for my survival as a non-native person collaborating with contemporary Ongwe people. Onondaga Nation, enter at your own risk. So if you're going to keep entering, you have to keep thinking, what are the risks? How am I going to give back? How am I going to ensure that I give back more than I take? In addition to field work, I would say that the classroom is where borders, or where I have best understood the articulation of borders. And I don't mean as me as a teacher. My success, or whatever successes I have as an instructor, go back to how well I was in paying attention when I was a student. Because I don't know about you, Dr. Duran, but I sat through, 8 years of coursework, and I don't even know how many courses I TA'd for before we started working as adjuncts, before we started working as VAPs, before we started working as assistant professors. So everything, my teaching pedagogy largely consists of everything I thought those professors were doing correctly. I try to mimic, or I try to incorporate into my style. And maybe even more importantly, everything I thought they were doing incorrectly or that I thought wasn't working, I stay away from, and I don't incorporate into my teaching style. So I had a professor once. His name was Bill Cole, and he was the professor of the African American Studies Department at Syracuse University while I was a graduate student. And what he really was a jazz musician. So I took this course with him, and he had students write a journal. Wow, good use of the audio button there, Dr. Duran. Well done. He had this assignment, this journal assignment that was completely open-ended for students. He only collected it at the midterm and at the end of the semester, and it was worth 15 or 20% of the final grade, something like that. And he just told students, I want you to keep a journal. And he was straight with them. And he said, you will get out of this assignment whatever you put into this assignment. And that was over 20 years ago. And I never stopped thinking about the assignment. I never stopped thinking about the value of journaling. And in every class I've ever taught since that day, I have made a journal a requirement of that class. 10, 15, 20%. It's different depending on the course and depending on the makeup of the grading. And I collect it at the midterm and I collect it at the end of the semester because I want to know, to the extent that they want to share, and obviously to the extent that we're governed by our professional ethics and Title IX and we're mandatory reporters, obviously all the boilerplate language. But I want to know, to the extent that they're willing to share with me, every single student that sits in my class, whether it's a 15-person class or a 25-person class or a 100-person class. And they get a chance here to set the border. They get a chance here to say, this is what I'm going to share with you. This is what I'm going to tell you about me. This is what I'm going to tell you, and this is what I'm going to record. And I say it to them each and every semester. The journal is 85% for you because it is, and 15% for me because I do read them, and I do get to know every single student who takes the assignment seriously. And so they're graded for completion. If you take the assignment seriously, you get full credit. If you don't take the assignment seriously, you don't get full credit. But by this point, I've read thousands upon thousands of student journals. I know exactly who takes the assignment seriously and who doesn't. I think that this is a way of not balancing the equation, but promoting um, real agency amongst students. It's a way of providing them an outlet for their thoughts, their feelings, and their emotions. The things that I tell them to uh, put on the back burner when they're making a sound argument or an analysis. I tell them not to be generated by their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. But this is a place for their thoughts, their feelings, and their emotions. But this is also a place to deal with the potentially triggering topics from class. I talk about gender and genocide. I talk about race and religious freedom. I talk about conquest and colonization. These are not easy topics to discuss on a day in, day out basis. So, again, the journal provides students a place to explore their thoughts, feelings, and emotions while providing them a chance to set that border by themselves, or allowing them a place to set that border um, with their instructors. I'll keep this one fast. I'll go fast, Avery. The last place for me and I was thinking of this, Dr. Duran, when you were discussing the anecdote with your students, the last place for me um, that it's important for me to have borders. These strong limitations are um, in my office because I'm very different in the classroom as I am in my office, as I am in my home, as we all are. Uh, Contextually, the classroom, contextually, the office, contextually, the home. These are different spaces. So, um, I had this student who I had before, during, and after the pandemic. And then those students who we were with before, during, and after, we went through it together, the pre, during, and after. And it was after the pandemic, and I had an incredible amount of trust with this student, and they were feeling it one day. And they said to me, "You know what I need right now? I need to take a nap." Because they had like a presentation or a project due. They couldn't go home. Whatever it was, they could not go home. They couldn't rest. Like, I need to take a nap. Do you think I could? You think I could have the key to your office and take a nap? You think I could just rest here? And I looked right at him and I said, "Absolutely not." And we, it took a couple of days, but we caught up a couple of days later. And I looked at them and I said, "Do you know why the answer was no?" And they said, "Yeah, because it would look bad." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. It would look bad, but the office is pretty private. Probably no one would have saw you. It doesn't matter if someone sees or not. That's not why the answer is no. The answer wouldn't be if I could ensure that no one saw. That doesn't mean the answer would be yes." And they said, "Well, why not?" And I didn't mean to get too Kantian, but the answer is the categorical imperative. The answer is because this student, we had already planned. This student was moving to the UK to go to graduate school. They since finished graduate school. They're working full time as an archaeologist, digging up stuff in the UK, absolutely crushing it, like doing a wonderful job. The reason why the answer was no, is because I can't honestly look at you and say, "I want you to trust your future instructors. I want you
Mhm.
to trust your future professors to with the idea that you would take a rest or take a nap in their office." There's no way in hell that I want you taking a nap in somebody else's office. And so that means there's no way in hell you can take a nap in my office. And that is the categorical imperative. That is the Kantian ethics. If you can't say yes across the board, then the answer is no. But in this case, I had to say no because I wanted the answer to be no, and I wanted them to learn that this is not an appropriate relationship to have with someone who is bound by the ethics of the professor-student relationship. So even though we had a great relationship, even though we continue to have a great relationship today, that was one of those moments, at least for me, Dr. Duran, that was one of those anecdotes that had to be done and continues to show me that when the time is right, you need to act. You need to act with confidence. You need to act with direction, and people will understand the decisions that you make when you are the one who isn't providing the agenda, but really acting with the agency. I have much more to say, but I have to stop because we promised ourselves that we wouldn't talk this whole time and that we would actually leave time for discussion. So I am going to stop. I am going to turn off the stop share, and I want to ask the group. Y'all can either go off mute and speak into the space, or you can feel free to use the chat. In terms of bridges, because this is the last thing we want to discuss today. That transit, and we're defining the bridge as the transition from student to mentee, or what happens after graduation or post graduation here. Uh, I ruined the first part of the question. Shit. Or at least I revealed what I think about it. But I didn't say that part. Let's just say, when does the mentorship begin with students? And how do responsibilities shift after they are no longer an official student of yours at SUNY Oswego. Again, feel free to go off mute and speak into the space. Y'all can, do the weird little raise your awkward yellow hand thing, or feel free to go off, or you can use the chat as well.
I would say for me, sorry, this is Jessica Harris, Department of Health Promotion and Wellness. I would say for me, the mentorship starts, I guess, right away throughout the 4 years that they're here. So similar to Dr. Duran in the sense that I do have communication with students via my own personal phone. It depends on the student and the situation. So I have had situations that students really needed that extra support with things going on, and maybe needed some advice, or there was some mental health issues going on, that type of stuff. And I have given my personal cell to those students. I haven't had any issues with boundaries with that. I think because I prior had a good relationship with the students. I think they understand, that process. But I think a lot of the students, may need that extra support, and they may not have anybody that are close here. So sometimes they look to us as those mentors who they're seeing consistently, in the classroom every day to kind of be that person. So for me, I have kind of done that mentorship throughout kind of the 4 years, and there's been some students that have my personal cell. Also on the other end, similar to you also, Michael, in the sense that I have also given students my phone number only after graduation too, depending on the students, right? I kind of had my judgment there of who, but yeah, students will reach out for letters of recommendation or those types of things. So I try and keep myself available and supportive in any way I can in that regard. So that's kind of how I've done it. I try and establish those boundaries as well by kind of who I give the phone number to, I guess, in that sense. But I guess it takes kind of having that rapport with the student before I do that. So if that makes sense, I kind of jumbled it all there, but.
I like that and just picking off of what you just said with the letters of recommendation, this semester, that was a firm boundary that I needed to set, because it had gotten to the point where, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, this semester, because I just looked at my little Excel sheet here, I wrote 67 letters of recommendation
Wow.
this semester alone.
Wow.
And that is, if we're being frank, not Frank Byrne, just frankly, that is an asinine amount of letters of recommendation to write for students. And in establishing boundaries, something that I had to tell students was, I need to start setting a limit on how many letters total I can write for students in a given semester. And, a lot of you will say, well, you can have a template. I don't do templates. I don't do templates because I take my relationships with students very, very seriously. I also tell them I will not write you a letter of recommendation if all you did was show up to class.
Right.
If all you've done is show up to class and you got a couple of good grades, I cannot write an effective letter of rec in that respect. I need to know, what is it that you've done outside of campus? How have I worked with you outside of the classroom? And also understanding that a good letter of recommendation takes time.
Yes.
Do not text or email me on a Monday when a letter is due on a Wednesday, because the answer is going to be no. But a lot of that also has to do with, bringing that back to that first question, when do you reassess when a boundary needs to be made? When they get too comfortable. When they get too comfortable. And I had a situation with a student who I've been working with the student since they were a freshman. They are about to be a junior. They registered for my course, and immediately from the onset, they were taking it very, very relaxed. They would show up to class 20 to 30 minutes into the class, which is already a big pet peeve of mine. And they were like, oh, when I confronted them about it, they said, oh, I thought that we were in a better space than that. I go, I don't understand why you would think that I would compromise my professional standing or my professional standard for whatever personal relationship we have. And if anything, if you claim to have all this respect and value for me, then the way that you prioritize this class and how you should show up should be reflective of that and not the opposite. But yes, the getting too comfortable to thinking that they can trade off of your personal relationship to get some sort of like professional leeway or something like that. Um, and the letters of recommendation this semester were a big aha moment for me, especially because if depending on the discipline that you're writing the letter for, all the letters go into a central repository. So I
Right.
can't write a template letter for a law school application because they all go to LASAC.
Right. Yeah, I'm similar in that regard too. I don't use a template. I do the same thing. Because I think it's more meaningful, but and I'm hoping those institutions that they're going on to actually look at those and value those. I did have one student who got into a doctoral program who reached back out to me and said that the institution was, thought the letter of recommendation was amazing. And I was like, okay, so people do read these, right? And they do know that we have these relationships with students. And so yeah, right there with you with the amount. I definitely didn't have 67, but that is definitely a lot there. Yeah. Yeah.
I think for me, it's been a little different. I work as an assistant director for campus recreation. So my student staff all have my phone number in case of an emergency going on, like within the facilities. And I've had to like set that boundary of like, don't call me at 10 o'clock because you can't figure out how to turn the lights off. Like, go to our leadership team or my GA. I'm only there for like absolute emergencies. Someone's like passed out in the facility. Um, we've gotten a lot better with that. My first year here, it was like 10 o'clock at night. Oh, I think I forgot to turn off the computer. What do I need to do? And I'm like, just leave it. It's fine. Like, don't bother me at 10 o'clock at night because you forgot to turn off the computer. So there's that side I've been able to like figure out, but where I've struggled a little bit is my second year here, I taught dance classes for the dance minors. I haven't been teaching because of all of the let goes of adjuncts and extra service pay, but I'm the advisor for DelSart. So I've had a few that are in DelSart that I'm like a mentor for as their advisor, but they were also in my class. And then it was like, I am very close in age to them. I'm turning 28 this summer, but being close in age, they feel like they can just come and tell me about anything. And they're like, oh, I went to the bar this weekend. I'm like, you're not 21. Like, don't talk to me about that. I don't want to know these things. So it's like that comfortability. I'm like, how do I navigate these? Like, I want to be there for you, like as an advisor, as a mentor, but also like, I don't need to know what you're doing outside of what needs to be in these conversations. Like, once you've graduated, sure, you can tell me about someone came up to and approached you at the bar, but until then, like, I don't need to know that. So it's kind of been like, these are my boundaries for this part of my job, these are for this part, but also like a couple of them are in DelCert and work for me now as staff. And so trying to like reestablish those boundaries because they weren't there in that relationship, but now they need to be there. And so trying to navigate those has been a little hard for me.
Yeah, and especially because of institutional policies that are directly related to how their off-campus behavior, regardless of whether it lands in any sort of criminal justice intervention, will 100% come to follow them on campus. That's also something that I try to establish with them, where I tell them, I love that you feel comfortable with me, but also understand my positionality as your faculty member and what my knowledge of your illegal or deviant behavior is going to mean for you moving forward. Which is why, in class, I am very, very clear. If you like to provide an anecdote that can, help bolster this point that we're making, it is never you. It is never my friend. It is never my family. It is Jane or John Doe. We need plausible deniability, especially in cases where clearly, your behavior or your actions are not putting yourself or others in any sort of physical, emotional, or medical risk, but could put your academic career at risk. And, same thing, like, and even students who I don't know. And this is also where I guess that whole like establishing physical borders, because I don't dress like a faculty member. I'm very comfortable in saying when I first started teaching, you could tell I was faculty because everything was, I was suited and booted. And I made it a point to olden myself to create that authoritative separation. But here I look like them. So they don't pay attention to the words that come out of their mouths. Like just during finals week, I had a student in front of me in the cafe line bragging about how AI wrote all of their papers. And that was, and I use the word, I go, this is me helping you establish a professional boundary. Don't ever, 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 ever stand in an academic building and brag on how you are blatantly cheating your way through your academic career, because you never know who is listening. You never know, who are the types of people that are going to take their job very seriously. And I told them, I am well within my right to report this to the dean, because you've been sitting here in front of me, in front of 10 other people, talking about how you are blatantly violating the student code of conduct. So I can, but I won't. Because one, I ain't got that kind of time. That's the boundary that I'm setting for myself. But also understand that you have a responsibility to do the work on your own. And what does that mean then when you have a relationship with a faculty member, a professional staff, someone in administration, and how you think you are now allowed to navigate in these spaces?
Yeah, I had a student I had just hired from one of our other areas during the break, during winter break, and he was like, yeah, I could probably fudge my payroll. Like we were sitting in a room, I was sitting with some of the GAs. He goes, yeah, I could probably fudge my payroll. I've told a lie or two in my time. I'm like, you probably should not be talking about falsifying your time in front of me before you even start working for me, because that is a fireable offense.
Yeah, and
Not
definitely
do
one
that
that can
and
get
think about it.
litigated. Healing time is a thing, guys.
I'm like, that could be a thought in your head, but don't ever let it actually play out.
Oh, that's something that I've had to work on with myself, just because I think it doesn't mean I should say it, which gets me in a lot of trouble.
I had a quick comment on the question, when do you shift when do you shift to mentorship? Like Carrie, I also supervise student staff in the tutoring center. And I think it kind of depends on the student, like if they're, seeking mentorship. But I have served as a mentor with two students in particular who we're doing a special project beyond like the regular job description. So, um, I was able to kind of serve as a mentor to them and just give them the support they needed to meet the goals of their project, but they were still in the lead of their project. But so
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, that was I wrote that part of the prompt because to me it's a just fostering trust is the most important thing to foster for me in the student teacher relationship. And then like the mentor relationship takes like this incredible like it's like magnitudes up of like um the trust factor to have this kind of advisement, friendship, uh professional, all these things, all these different aspects that go into this mentee mentor relationship. So to me it does, it's not that it can't start while they're still at university, but it takes a while. I don't know if I've ever mentored someone in my NAS one, my intro level course. It takes a while for that relationship to cultivate and to build over the semesters and over the years.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of the time. Thank you. And we'll stop the recording and see you at other sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great Monday, everyone.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, John and Jessica. Cheers.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jessica.
Thank you.